Standing at 38 with nothing but a suitcase and determination, I never imagined I'd find myself answering classified ads for domestic work. The separation had drained more than my bank account. It had stripped away my sense of purpose. But survival doesn't care about wounded pride, and when the utilities company sends final notices, you take whatever honest work comes your way. The advertisement was simple. Housekeeper needed. Quiet home, flexible hours, references required. Located in Maplewood Heights, an upscale neighborhood where the lawns were pristine and secrets hid behind curtained windows. I called immediately, desperate for steady income and structure in my fractured life. The residence stood imposing yet welcoming, with ivy climbing brick walls and a wraparound porch that suggested better times. When the door opened, I met Marcus early. 40s, wearing a navy sweater with sleeves pushed to his elbows, dark hair slightly disheveled as if he'd been running his fingers through it. His handshake was firm, his smile polite but guarded, like someone who had learned to keep the world at arm's length. "Welcome," he said, his voice carrying traces of exhaustion. "Let me show you around." The house tour was brief and businesslike. Main floor cleaning, he explained living areas, kitchen, his home office. "The second floor is off limits," he mentioned casually, though something in his tone suggested this wasn't merely about privacy. "Just keep the common spaces presentable." I accepted the boundaries without question. Work was work, and I needed this more than I needed answers to unspoken mysteries. My first weeks passed in comfortable routine. I arrived at 9, completed my tasks methodically, and departed by 3. Marcus worked from his ground floor office, always buried in video conferences or typing rapidly on his laptop. He drank tea instead of coffee Earl Grey, always steeping too long until it turned bitter. I'd find his forgotten cups throughout the house, cold and untouched. Gradually, I began noticing details that painted a picture of solitude. A violin case gathering dust in the corner, sheet music scattered but unplayed, wedding china displayed but never used. Most telling was the framed photograph on the mantel. Marcus with a radiant woman whose auburn hair caught sunlight, both of them laughing at some private joke. The picture was the only personal touch in otherwise sterile perfection. Despite the emotional distance, Marcus was consistently courteous. He'd leave encouraging notes: "The garden room looks wonderful, thank you," or "I appreciate your attention to detail." Once, after I'd organized his chaotic bookshelf without being asked, I found a small potted orchid on the kitchen counter with a card, "For going above and beyond." Such unexpected kindness stirred something I'd thought buried. It had been months since anyone acknowledged my efforts, my existence, my worth beyond what I could provide. I began arriving earlier, taking time to truly see the space I was caring for. Through the bay window, I'd catch glimpses of Marcus reading on the back deck or standing pensively by the fountain in his garden. There was a profound loneliness about him that I recognized, not the loneliness of being alone, but of having lost someone irreplaceable and not knowing how to fill that void. One afternoon, as I was polishing the piano, Marcus paused in the doorway. "You're doing exceptional work," he said, and something in his voice made me look up. I mean that sincerely. He seemed to want to say more, his eyes holding mine for a moment longer than necessary, but then he simply nodded and retreated to his office. Still, that brief connection lingered with me through the evening, warming something that had been cold for far too long. Nights became filled with curious thoughts about the man whose home I tended. What dreams did he harbor? What memories haunted those unused rooms upstairs? Why did everything feel suspended in time, as if the house itself was holding its breath? I maintained professional boundaries. I had to. Complications were luxuries I couldn't afford, but there was an undeniable pull, a sense that this house was a place where healing had stalled, and perhaps, just perhaps, Marcus wasn't entirely opposed to letting someone help him find his way back to living. Being in that house gave me something I'd lost, purpose that transcended mere tasks. It wasn't just about polishing furniture or organizing spaces, it was about being seen again, mattering in small but significant ways. For someone who had felt invisible in her own marriage, this recognition was everything. So I continued showing up, working diligently, and wondering quietly what might unfold when two wounded souls kept crossing paths in a house that seemed to be waiting for change to arrive. The transformation began with an unexpected request on a Tuesday afternoon. "Would you mind helping me with something upstairs?" Marcus asked, his voice softer than usual, carrying a vulnerability I hadn't heard before. I hesitated. The second floor had been forbidden territory since day one, but something in his expression, tentative, hope mixed with resignation, made me nod. Of course, the upstairs revealed an entirely different world. Warm hardwood floors, family photographs lining the hallway, built-in bookshelves overflowing with well-loved volumes. The scent of cedar and old books created an atmosphere of lived-in comfort that contrasted sharply with the careful neutrality below. He led me to a room at the corridor's end. "My real office," he explained, opening the door to reveal creative chaos. Papers everywhere, art supplies scattered across a drafting table, canvases leaning against walls. "I've been meaning to organize this for ages, but I could never bring myself to start." The silence that followed felt loaded with understanding. This wasn't just about cleaning, it was about confronting whatever kept him paralyzed in this space. As we worked together, Marcus began sharing fragments of his story. The fountain pen had belonged to his grandfather, a renowned architect. The sketches scattered about were his own designs. He'd been a landscape architect before everything changed. The woman in the photographs was Sarah, his wife, of 8 years, taken by a sudden heart condition just 2 years prior. "She used to paint in here," he said, touching a canvas still clipped to an easel. "Watercolors mostly. She said this room had the best light in the house." I listened without judgment, offering my presence as he pieced together memories he'd kept locked away. In return, I found myself sharing pieces of my own journey, not the bitter details, but the struggle to rebuild identity after losing not just a marriage, but sense of self. From that day forward, our interactions deepened. He'd ask for help with various upstairs projects, and we'd work side by side, conversation flowing naturally between us. Sometimes we talked about art, sometimes about travel, occasionally about loss and resilience. The rigid employer-employee dynamic gradually softened. Marcus began preparing fresh coffee when I arrived, and we'd share a cup before beginning work. These moments weren't scheduled or formal, they simply evolved, two people finding comfort in unexpected companionship. One evening, as I prepared to leave, Marcus walked me to the door. "You've brought warmth back to this place," he said quietly. I hadn't realized how much I needed that. His words settled deep in my chest, touching places that had been empty for too long. This wasn't romance yet, it was something more fragile and precious. A connection forming in the spaces between our carefully constructed defenses. I began looking forward to these daily encounters with anticipation I hadn't felt in years. The way Marcus listened when I spoke, really listened, without trying to fix or judge. The way he smiled when he caught me humming while I worked. The way he looked at me not as hired help, but as someone whose thoughts and feelings mattered. Still, I remained cautious. He was grieving, vulnerable, and I was rebuilding my life from fragments. Neither of us was in a position to make promises or assumptions, but something undeniable was growing between us, patient and genuine. Something I wasn't sure I was ready for, but increasingly certain I didn't want to lose. The evening that changed everything arrived with storm clouds building throughout the day. By the time I finished organizing his study, rain was pelting the windows with increasing intensity. "The weather's getting nasty," Marcus observed, appearing in the doorway as I gathered my things. "Would you consider staying for dinner, just until the storm passes?" Something in his voice, hope carefully contained, made refusal impossible. I set down my bag and nodded. That night, sitting at his kitchen table sharing homemade soup and stories, felt like stepping across an invisible threshold. He asked questions he'd never asked about my dreams, my fears, what brought me joy. I answered more openly than I had with anyone in years, surprised by my own honesty. After dinner, I mentioned the violin I'd been dusting for months. His expression grew wistful. Sarah loved when I played, he said softly. She'd curl up in that chair by the window and listen for hours. I haven't touched it since. Would you play something now? I asked gently. He retrieved the instrument with reverent care, tuning it slowly as if reacquainting himself with an old friend. The melody he chose was hauntingly beautiful, filled with longing and memory. Listening to him play, watching the emotions cross his face, I felt tears I didn't expect. When the music faded, he looked at me with something deeper than gratitude, recognition, perhaps, that we were both carrying burdens we'd been too afraid to share. The night lingered in my thoughts for days afterward. I found myself replaying the sound of his violin, the gentleness in his voice, the way he looked at me as if I was more than just a temporary presence in his carefully ordered world. Then came the phone call that complicated everything. My former colleague had recommended me for a position at a marketing firm, better salary, benefits, career advancement. On paper, it was everything I'd been working toward, but when I tried to picture myself in that office environment, all I could think about was the quiet mornings in Marcus's house, the easy conversations, the sense of belonging I'd found in that unlikely place. I didn't tell Marcus immediately. I needed time to think, to separate practical considerations from the emotions that had crept up so unexpectedly. But secrets have a way of revealing themselves, and he learned about the opportunity through a mutual acquaintance. The change in him was immediate and heartbreaking. The warmth vanished, replaced by polite distance that felt like a physical barrier between us. Congratulations, he said when I finally brought up the subject. It sounds like exactly what you've been looking for. His tone was carefully neutral, but I could see the walls rebuilding themselves in real time. Whatever fragile connection we'd been nurturing suddenly felt foolish. Imagined. I wanted to explain that the job offer wasn't about dissatisfaction with our arrangement, but about securing my future. I wanted to tell him that leaving felt like tearing away a part of myself I'd just rediscovered. Instead, I simply nodded and continued my work, the house feeling colder with each passing hour. My final day arrived with surprising swiftness. Moving through familiar rooms, I touched surfaces I'd cleaned countless times, now imbued with memory and meaning. The house had become more than a workplace, it had become a sanctuary where I'd begun healing. Marcus was absent when I arrived, and part of me felt grateful. Perhaps clean breaks were better than prolonged goodbyes. I left a simple note on the kitchen counter. Thank you for everything. I won't forget this place. Placed my key beside it and headed for the door. You were going to leave without saying goodbye? His voice stopped me at the threshold. I turned to find him standing there, looking as conflicted as I felt. I didn't think you'd want a scene, I said softly. He stepped closer, his expression vulnerable in a way I'd never seen. I should have spoken up sooner. I didn't want you to stay because you felt obligated. I'm not leaving because of you, I replied, my voice barely steady. I'm leaving because I thought you didn't want me to stay. The admission hung between us, years of protective instincts crumbling in the face of honest emotion. I don't know how to ask someone to stay, he said quietly. I've spent so long protecting myself from losing anyone else. I didn't realize I'd already started letting someone in. The truth we'd both been circling finally surfaced, filling the space between us with possibility rather than regret. He moved closer, careful and uncertain. I don't want you to go. Not unless it's truly what you want. Looking at him, at this man who had quietly become essential to my daily happiness, I felt my resolve waver. I do want more for myself, I said, trying to find steady ground. But I also want honesty, real connection. No more walls. Then let's build something honest, he offered. No pressure, no assumptions, just possibility. For the first time in years, I felt truly seen, not as someone picking up pieces or filling a role, but as a complete person worthy of affection and partnership we didn't embrace immediately. We stood in the golden afternoon light of that big house, letting years of pain and hesitation slowly dissolve. I accepted the new position but chose to remain in town, and Marcus offered more than farewell, he offered a new beginning. "Would you come for dinner next week?" he asked. Just as two people getting to know each other properly, I said yes, and that yes felt like the bravest word I'd spoken in years. From there, our story unfolded gently. We talked openly, shared quiet evenings, and discovered that healing doesn't always require solitude. He returned to his violin. I rediscovered my love of photography. We supported each other's growth, held space for difficult days, and laughed more than either of us had thought possible. Love, I learned, doesn't always announce itself dramatically. Sometimes it arrives quietly, through shared work and gradual trust, through dinner on a stormy night and music played for one listener. If you're fortunate, it stays not to complete you, but to walk beside you as you become whole. This wasn't the life I'd planned or the job I'd imagined when I set out to rebuild everything. But in that unexpected house, I found something more valuable than security. I found connection, hope, and the quiet beginnings of love. And this time, I wasn't afraid to let it grow.